Hello, my name is Adrienne deWolfe, and today I'm going to read an excerpt from my #1 best-selling romance novel, Scoundrel for Hire. Scoundrel for Hire is the first book in my Western historical romance series, Velvet Lies. Here, you're looking at the original paperback cover published by Avon. Scoundrel for Hire features my first rogue hero, Raphael Jones, a smooth-talking Shakespearean actor turned con man. The heroine, Silver, is a mining heiress. She hires Rafe to prove to her lovesick papa that he's engaged to a dangerous gold digger. I'm planning to write 5 total books for the Velvet Lies series. Book number 2, His Wicked Dream, features Rafe's sexy older brother, Michael. Like most physicians, Michael's a tad on the stubborn side. When he can't figure out a cure for his illness, Eden has some work to do to convince him to try her unconventional healing methods. Book number 3, Seduced by an Angel, features Rafe's kid sister, Sarah. Sarah possesses the unusual gift of psychometry. When she touches metal, she has psychic visions. The hero, outlaw Jesse Quaid, has to convince her to use her gift to clear his name of a murder he didn't commit. But this video is devoted to that rascally con man, Rafe. Here's the ebook cover for Scoundrel for Hire. Check out Rafe's crazy gold coat. There's a reason for that coat, and it has to do with his con. Considering that a 14-year-old Rafe played the role of Shakespeare's Juliet in the famous balcony scene, Rafe has learned to be a bit of a comedian. In fact, you can expect hilarity and hijinks all throughout this novel. One of my private jokes that I share only with the reader is that every character in this book is hoodwinking somebody else. I have so many favorite scenes that it was truly difficult to choose just one to read. I love the seance scene where Celestia, the fortune teller, calls for the vengeful spirit. And another favorite is the bathtub scene where Silver gets a surprise visit from Rafe's ward. But I finally decided to read the excerpt where Rafe arrives at Silver's mansion to begin the job that she hired him for. He's supposed to impersonate a British lord and woo Celestia away from Papa. This excerpt opens Chapter 6. Peering out his coach window, Rafe smirked at Silver's massive Romanesque mansion. Judging by the lights, music, and laughter, the party was well underway. He'd taken great care to arrive last. Timing was everything in the theater. Giving the coach roof a whack with his walking stick, a shiny new acquisition that amused him to no end, he displayed the bored manner of a British blue blood. His demeanor was no small feat, considering the result of his whack. The vehicle lurched, the wheels bounced, and he was nearly flung from his seat. God love Jimmy, he'd finally located the brakes. Rafe heard a thump and the eager pounding of boots. A heartbeat later, an impossibly gullible youth flung open the door. Jimmy's ruddy cheeks were bulging above his collar. Rafe suspected that Jimmy had never worn a collar in his less auspicious job as a cantaloupe picker. "Man alive, your worship, sir! That house sure is some pumpkins!" Rafe gazed fondly at the youth. Jimmy was decked out in a red livery that had cost Rafe, or rather Silver, at least twice as much as every item of clothing that Jimmy had ever owned. Jimmy was a new acquisition that amused Rafe to no end. He couldn't wait to spring the lad on Little Miss High Society. "That house," Rafe gestured toward the grand edifice with a limp hand. "Some pumpkins, you say? Lud, my boy, you have yet to see my kennels." Jimmy's eyes bugged out, making him look like a guppy with spiky blonde hair. Golly! Rafe hid his smile. Tossing back his cape with a flourish, he stepped briskly up the cobbled walk that wound toward the door. He'd been waiting 2 excruciatingly long days for this moment. When he'd agreed to save Silver's sainted papa from the clutches of a gold digger, he'd assumed that Silver had arranged for him to seduce a modern-day Jezebel. He'd conjured in his mind a woman so sinful, so voluptuous, that no mortal man could possibly have resisted her. Silver had never bothered to correct his misconception. Well, at the hotel yesterday morning, he'd finally caught a glimpse of Celestia as she was sending off Max with a kiss. Rafe was sure his jaw had hit the carpet. Max's affair d'amour was no pert-breasted fantasy in the flesh. Even worse, Celestia was old enough to be Rafe's mother. He'd been so furious, disappointed too, that he'd had half a mind to vanish into the wilderness and let Silver sweat out her father's engagement. Unfortunately, his finances wouldn't permit such rash behavior. However, he wasn't about to let Silver know that. Oh, no. His cohort in crime had a little lesson to learn about bamboozling Raphael Jones. He'd thought long and hard about his options, and he'd finally decided on the only sensible alternative: revenge. Hiring Jimmy had been integral to Rafe's plan. Spending a king's fortune on Silver's credit had also been part of his mischief. But best of all were the character improvements that he'd made in the aristocratic role that Silver had scripted for him. Snickering to himself, he rapped his cane on the door. He envisioned the look on his co-conspirator's face when he unveiled the new mincing Lord Cholmondeley. To his surprise, a pine tree of a manservant appeared in impeccable swallowtails. "Hello, my good man," Rafe said in his best British fop's voice. "Do step aside and tell Miss Nichols the Duke of Cholmondeley has arrived." The manservant arched an eyebrow. One sweeping, flesh-scoring glance later, he'd masterfully conveyed what he thought of Rafe's attire, and all of Rafe's ancestry. "The Duke of Cholmondeley, you say?" the servant repeated in an unmistakably British accent. The back of Rafe's neck turned blistering hot. Damn Silver anyway. She'd also neglected to tell him she had an English butler. "That's correct." Rafe fixed the servant with his haughtiest stare and vowed to make Silver the shyster pay double, no, triple, for the second breach of contract. "Run along and fetch your mistress. And I suggest, sir, that you run along before I have you thrown into the gutter." A heartbeat later, the door slammed, and Rafe was left staring at his reflection in the quivering opaque glass. "Silver, my love, that's another one I owe you." For her part, Silver nearly dropped an entire tray of champagne glasses when she heard Rafe's voice and her butler's threat. Hurrying into the entrance hall, she rounded the corner just in time to see Benson slamming the door on her long-awaited guest. Benson! She was certain she'd blanched. She raced through her guests, consoling herself that this night couldn't possibly get worse. First, her illustrious chef had arrived tipsy, an empty bottle of cooking sherry jutting from his pocket. Next, her pricey Denver orchestra had turned out to be little more than a tone-deaf oompa band. Then her father's bride-to-be, who'd come dressed in a purple turban and genie slippers, had grabbed the mayor's hand and started predicting his re-election returns. But the final horror on this night of horrors, Silver thought, groaning to herself, would be to watch her scoundrel for hire become unmasked by her very own butler. It was moments like these when Silver wondered if Celestia had fashioned a rag poppet in her likeness and was gleefully jabbing pins into its head. Hurrying past the guest register and its vase of summer flowers, Silver thrust her tray of champagne glasses into her butler's hands. "For heaven's sake, Benson, what's the matter with you?" Throwing open the door, she almost sobbed with relief to find Rafe still standing on the stoop. He managed to look unperturbed, as if nearly getting his nose smashed against a window pane was an everyday occurrence. "My Lord Chumley, please do come in. I am so sorry. I don't know what has gotten into my butler. Obviously, there's been a misunderstanding. Benson, apologize at once to his lordship." Benson drew himself up to his full 6 feet 7 inches. "With all due respect, Miss Nichols, this man is an Benson!" Silver hastily interrupted, mortified to think her guests might hear what she had done. "Kindly do as you're told." The butler's face modeled at her lady of the house tone. However, years of serving, not to mention the tidy stipend she paid him, must have won out over his pride. With a coldness that would have endeared him only to penguins, he inclined his head. "My apologies to your Grace," he added disdainfully. "Pish-posh, my good fellow. The matter is entirely forgotten." Silver narrowed her eyes to hear Rafe's affected lisp. As relieved as she was that he'd finally arrived as promised, the impression he was making was far from the desired effect. For some unfathomable reason, he'd selected a gold velvet coat, a chartreuse waistcoat, and matching green spats for his shoes. His cravat was a frilly affair, and the tawny mutton-chop whiskers that he'd pasted to his jaws gave him a comical rather than sophisticated air. Deciding she would be wise to debrief her impostor, she dismissed Benson and caught her troublemaker's arm. "Come along, my lord. I'll see to your cape." "Jolly good." He started to hum, waving his handkerchief in time to the abysmally off-key ditty. Silver gritted her teeth as she dragged him beneath the staircase. "Must you be such a trial?" she whispered, snatching that ridiculous linen from his hand. "You're late. Don't tell me you spent all this time at the tailor's, because clearly you did not. Where on earth did you get that waistcoat?" Rafe's lips twitched as he lovingly smoothed the brocade. "Rather festive, don't you think?" "You don't want to know what I think." Drawing a calming breath, she opted for reason over ire. "Well, you're here now, and nothing can be done about—" She realized Rafe wasn't even listening to her. He was too busy gawking through his quizzing glass at the statue her love-struck father had commissioned for the alcove. The sterling maiden was supposed to represent Aphrodite. All its shameless, bare-chested glory made Silver blush. However, Rafe was fairly smirking at the sculpture's pronounced places. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" She grabbed his sleeve, yanking him toward less scandalous vistas. "Will you please pay attention?" His lazy golden lashes swept lower, lingering on her own modest décolletage. "I would be delighted." Her inside shriveled with embarrassment. Despite the caress in his gaze, it was hard to feel adequate compared with the Greek goddess of love. "I know this is just a lark to you," she whispered fervently. "Just another performance. But my whole world will come crashing down if you don't pull off this role." Those pewter eyes held her spellbound. For a moment, she forgot that she'd sold her soul to this tawny-haired devil. She forgot that one poorly timed lie, one spiteful wisecrack, and her scoundrel for hire could destroy every happiness she'd ever known. "This is the point of no return," he said softly, a reluctant nobility stirring in his gaze. His words sizzled along every repentant nerve. He was right, of course. She had an entire ballroom full of guests, all of whom were laughing at her father's choice in brides, and not one of them knew that Celestia was suspected of arson. Desperate times call for desperate measures, she reminded herself staunchly. Don't tell me you've suddenly developed a conscience, she chided Rafe. Nothing so drastic. A smile teased the corner of his mouth. He'd become Rogue Romeo again, and no amount of whiskers, sashes, or lace flounces could detract from his sensuality. But I trust I'll be a busy man in the nights to come, and I was noticing how much you seem to admire me. Admire you? Good Lord, she wanted to crawl under a potted fern. Was she that transparent, or was he only fishing? Admit it, Silver. The very thought of Celestia in my arms makes you jealous. Her cheeks were growing hotter by the second. You, sir, suffer from delusions. Come now. His voice had lowered to a throbbing murmur. I can see how your pulse speeds whenever I draw near. Your skin flushes, your eyes dilate. You would much rather I lavished my kisses on you.